from the Penn libraries.
I was interested in this text called the Sacred Edict, which was a very concise, terse, classical Chinese text issued by the Kangxi Emperor of China. And it was to tell the citizens how to behave, do this, do this, do this, be like this. There were moral precepts for how to be a good citizen. And it was fairly straightforward, but then you think, how did he communicate that classical Chinese knowledge to the citizens who don't understand classical Chinese? And they're totally illiterate. They wouldn't understand even written vernacular. So I went searching for the means whereby the emperor's words were made accessible to the people. And I found out that district magistrates would actually translate the classical Chinese into vernacular Chinese. And they would then read these vernacular translations or lecture on these vernacular translations to the assembled people in the village or the local areas. And of course now these educated literati who were the magistrates, they didn't like to mess around with vernacular Chinese because it was considered vulgar and inferior. So they really didn't want to have their name attached to these translations. And very few of them survived because they weren't elite, cultured literature. But to me, they're like so precious because it's what really was going on at the grassroots level. So most of these texts disappeared. And they weren't really printed and reprinted, or they were just sort of almost like manuscripts or circulated in a very small scale. So I was searching everywhere. I went to many different libraries to search for these kinds of texts. I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, I went to Princeton, I went to Columbia. I think I went out to Berkeley. Everywhere I could find some of these rare texts. So we call them rare because they're few in number. But in China, they have a very interesting way to refer to this kind of text. They would call it shanban, which means fine editions. But these aren't fine, but they're rare, okay? So I found a bunch of them, not a lot, but one here, one there. And then I found one on the shelves of Van Pelt. And it was extremely precious and worth a lot of money. One of these district magistrates' manuals for explaining the Sacred Edict. And I went out of my mind when I found that just in the stacks right out here. And I think an old professor, Dirk Bada, may have bought it in China, probably for a pittance when he was there, maybe in the 30s or of 1930s and something like that. And so I found that, and I held it, and I said, my gosh, this is so important. And it was just sitting on the stacks. And I called it to the attention of the rare book librarian. I said, please do not let this stay on the regular stacks. And so it's up in the rare book room now.